Admiral Drehorn's 6 eyes focused on the holographic display with the kind of bored contempt reserved for particularly unimpressive insects. His elongated fingers, each ending in what humans might generously call claws, drummed against the control panel in a rhythm that suggested profound intellectual superiority, and even more profound arrogance. "General Krafnog," he said, his voice carrying the particular smugness that only comes from having evolved past the need for actual vocal cords. "Remind me again why we're wasting precious research cycles on these, what did the classification board call them?" General Krafnog, whose own collection of eyes numbered a more modest 4, consulted his datapad with theatrical precision. "Homo sapiens, sir. Primitive bipeds, from the third rock orbiting a rather unremarkable yellow star. Classification, barely sentient. Intelligence rating, somewhere between moldy fruit and particularly clever furniture." The laboratory around them hummed with the quiet efficiency of a civilization that had mastered faster-than-light travel while humans were still figuring out fire. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls, each screen displaying different human colonies, different worlds, different potential test subjects going about their pathetically simple lives. "Ah yes," Admiral Drehorn mused, his mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his species. "And we're studying them because the High Council wants to understand how primitive species respond to controlled adversity. Something about improving our conquest protocols." Krafnog's tone suggested he found the entire endeavor about as intellectually stimulating as watching paint dry on a particularly boring planet. The Admiral's attention drifted to one specific screen, where a human female was directing the loading of cargo containers onto what these creatures laughably called a spacecraft. The vessel looked like it had been assembled by blind children using spare parts from a junkyard. "That one," he said, pointing a claw at the screen. "Amy Kowalski, correct. Cargo hauler, rated pilot, what passes for educated among her kind." "Indeed, sir. Perfect test subject. Completely average, utterly unremarkable, and currently hauling mining equipment to the Kepler 442 system. Her psychological profile indicates standard human responses: fear, panic, eventual resignation to death." Admiral Drehorn's mandibles clicked again. "Excellent. Begin the experiment." From the human's perspective, what happened next would later be described in their colorful vernacular as a really, really bad day. From the alien's perspective, it was Tuesday. The attack, if one could dignify it with such a term, was precisely calculated. Not enough to vaporize the ship entirely, that would end the experiment too quickly, but sufficient to cripple their vessel and strand them on the nearest celestial body. In this case, a particularly inhospitable moon, that the aliens had thoughtfully selected for its complete lack of breathable atmosphere, edible vegetation, or any of the other conveniences that carbon-based lifeforms seem to require. "Initiating controlled system failures now," announced Quartermaster A, whose designation reflected either a profound lack of imagination in alien naming conventions, or a bureaucracy so vast that creativity had been systematically eliminated. "Hull breach in 3, 2, 1. The monitoring screens lit up with delicious data as Amy Kowalski's cargo vessel, the Lucky Strike, suddenly found itself experiencing what humans would call a catastrophic malfunction, and what the aliens called Tuesday afternoon science. "Look at that," General Krafnog observed with scientific detachment, as emergency klaxons wailed through the human ship's corridors. Immediate elevation in stress hormones, increased heart rate, typical fight-or-flight responses. Absolutely predictable. On screen, Amy Kowalski was shouting orders to her crew with the kind of urgent intensity that suggested she hadn't yet grasped the futility of her situation. Her second-in-command, Brandon Torres, a human male, whose file indicated an unfortunate tendency toward what their species called heroism, was already sealing hull breaches with some sort of primitive adhesive foam. "How charmingly optimistic," Admiral Drehorn commented, watching as the humans scrambled to save their doomed vessel. "Do they actually believe they can repair that level of damage with their Stone Age tools?" The Lucky Strike limped toward the moon's surface in a controlled crash that was rather more controlled than the aliens had anticipated, and rather less crashy than they had hoped. Nevertheless, the vessel was thoroughly disabled, its crew stranded on a world that would kill them in approximately 72 hours. "Survival time estimate?" the Admiral inquired. 72 hours, assuming they ration their emergency supplies efficiently. "More likely 48 hours, once panic sets in, and they make the typically human mistakes of overconsumption and poor resource allocation." The aliens settled back to observe. In their experience, primitive species followed predictable patterns: first panic, then despair, then death. Sometimes the order varied, but the result was always the same: They were about to learn that humans had apparently never read the manual on how primitive species were supposed to behave. What happened next violated so many of the aliens' carefully researched behavioral predictions that several of their senior scientists would later require therapy. Instead of panicking, Amy Kowalski had done something that their psychological profiles hadn't anticipated. She had gotten angry. Not the wild, unfocused rage that led to poor decision-making, but the cold, calculating fury of a professional who had just realized someone had deliberately sabotaged her ship. "Brandon," she said, her voice carrying across the moon's surface through their jury-rigged communications system. "Tell me you got a good look at whatever hit us." "Clean hits on our primary systems, Skip," Brandon Torres replied, his tone suggesting he shared his captain's suspicions. "Too precise to be random debris, too convenient to be mechanical failure." The aliens watched in growing bewilderment as the humans began systematically stripping their crashed vessel. Instead of the expected mourning for their lost ship, they were treating the wreckage like a hardware store, having a fire sale. "What are they doing?" General Krafnog asked, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid sequence, a sign of confusion among his species. Admiral Drafhorn consulted his behavioral prediction algorithms, then consulted them again, then had his computers run a full diagnostic because clearly something was malfunctioning. "According to our models, they should be entering the despair phase of their psychological breakdown." On screen, Amy Kowalski was wielding some sort of plasma cutter with the efficiency of someone who had spent years maintaining equipment that was held together by determination and profanity. She was cutting structural supports from the Lucky Strike's hull, while Brandon and the rest of her crew sorted the pieces into organized piles. "Sir," Quartermaster reported with the nervous tension of someone about to deliver bad news to a superior. "They appear to be building something." "Building what?" the Admiral demanded. "Unknown, sir. But they've constructed what appears to be a pressurized shelter using hull plating from their cargo bay. They've also rigged a power supply using components from their engine room." This wasn't in the script. Primitive species weren't supposed to demonstrate advanced engineering skills while stranded on hostile worlds. They were supposed to huddle together for warmth and wait for death like civilized beings. Perhaps it's instinctive behavior," General Krafnog suggested hopefully. "Many species build rudimentary shelters when threatened." Admiral Drahorn's mandibles clicked irritably as he watched Amy Kowalski install what appeared to be a defensive perimeter around their improvised base, complete with automated warning systems cobbled together from their ship's sensor array. "Defensive perimeters are not instinctive behavior," he snapped. "That requires planning, foresight, and tactical thinking." "Maybe they're just lucky?" Quartermaster A offered weakly. The Admiral's 6 eyes fixed on the screen, where Brandon Torres was now fashioning what looked suspiciously like weapons from industrial mining equipment. Luck didn't explain the methodical way the humans were turning every piece of their destroyed ship into either a tool, a weapon, or a component of their rapidly expanding base. "Lucky," the Admiral repeated, his tone suggesting he found this explanation about as convincing as a used starship salesman's warranty. "Yes, I'm sure that's all it is." But even as he dismissed it as mere chance, a small part of his highly evolved brain was beginning to suspect that perhaps, just perhaps, the High Council's intelligence files on humans might have missed a few important details. 3 days into what was supposed to have been a simple observation of primitive death throes, Commander Tom Malley arrived at the research facility with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested someone higher up the food chain was asking uncomfortable questions. Malley, whose species had evolved from something that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a tax auditor, consulted his official documentation with the obsessive precision of someone whose career depended on following protocols exactly. "Admiral Drafthorn," he announced, his voice carrying the particular authority that comes from having the High Council's personal phone number, "I've been sent to review the progress of experiment designation, human response pattern analysis, subsection controlled adversity protocol." Behind him, Judge Quintera glided into the laboratory on what humans might have mistaken for legs but were actually specialized sensory organs designed for detecting legal violations. Her presence meant that someone, somewhere, was concerned about the ethics of the operation, which was rich considering they were deliberately trying to kill sentient beings for science. "Commander Malley, Judge Quintera," Admiral Drafthorn replied with the forced cordiality of someone greeting a tax audit. "Welcome to our facility. I trust you'll find our research protocols completely within acceptable parameters." "That remains to be determined," Judge Quintera intoned with the moral flexibility that came from a legal system that had classified genocide as aggressive urban planning for the past 3 centuries. Commander Molly's compound eyes focused on the monitoring screens where Amy Kowalski was currently installing what appeared to be a solar collection array built from salvaged navigation panels. The subjects appear to still be alive, Admiral. Our timeline indicates they should have expired approximately 47 hours ago. Yes, well, Admiral Drathorn's mandibles clicked nervously. They've proven somewhat more resourceful than anticipated, but well within normal statistical variations for primitive behavior. Resourceful enough to construct a sustainable habitat? Judge Quintera inquired, watching as Brandon Torres tested what looked suspiciously like a water reclamation system. Lucky accidents, General Krafnog interjected quickly. Random chance combining with desperate survival instincts. Nothing more. Commander Molly's expression, insofar as creatures with exoskeletons could be said to have expressions, suggested skepticism. Perhaps we should increase the pressure parameters. Standard protocol calls for escalating challenges when subjects prove unexpectedly resilient. This was exactly what Admiral Drathorn had been dreading. Increase how, precisely? Automated harassment drones, Molly replied, consulting his manual. Standard intimidation protocols. Low-level energy weapons, movement disruption, resource denial, nothing lethal, just enough to push them past their psychological breaking point. Judge Quintera nodded approvingly. Completely within ethical guidelines. We're not technically trying to kill them, just encourage them to die. The first wave of drones launched 18 minutes later, sleek mechanical predators designed to harass, intimidate, and generally make life miserable for anyone unfortunate enough to be on the receiving end. They were equipped with non-lethal energy weapons, noise generators, and psychological warfare protocols developed over centuries of subjugating primitive civilizations. They lasted approximately 6 minutes. What happened? Commander Molly demanded, staring at screens that now showed nothing but scattered drone wreckage, and what appeared to be Amy Kowalski field-stripping alien technology, with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this sort of thing before. Malfunction. Admiral Drathorn suggested hopefully. On screen, Brandon Torres was examining a drone's power core, with the focused attention of an engineer who had just found a particularly interesting puzzle to solve. Meanwhile, Amy was already incorporating drone armor plating into their defensive perimeter. Send more drones, Molly ordered. The second wave lasted 4 minutes. The third wave managed a respectable 8 minutes, but only because the humans were apparently taking time to properly disassemble each unit for maximum salvage value. Perhaps, Judge Quintara observed as they watched Amy's team construct what could only be described as an automated defense system using repurposed drone components. We should consider alternative approaches. More drones, Molly repeated, his voice taking on the stubborn quality of someone whose solution to every problem involved applying the same failed strategy with greater intensity. By the end of the day, Amy Kowalski's improvised base looked less like a desperate survival shelter and more like a small fortress. A small fortress that was now defended by automated turrets built from alien technology and powered by fusion cells that the humans had somehow managed to reverse engineer in less time than it had taken the original manufacturers to design them. They're still just getting lucky, Admiral Drathorn insisted, though his voice carried about as much conviction as a politician's campaign promises. A random chance, primitive intuition. Certainly nothing that suggests actual intelligence. But as he watched Amy Kowalski install what appeared to be a communications array capable of reaching other star systems, the Admiral was beginning to suspect that their definition of primitive might need some revision. What the aliens failed to understand, despite their advanced degrees in xenobiology and their extensive databases on primitive species behavior, was that Amy Kowalski hadn't spent her entire adult life hauling cargo through the galaxy's more questionable neighborhoods without learning a thing or two about survival. More specifically, she hadn't survived 3 separate encounters with space pirates, 2 corporate takeover attempts, and 1 memorably unpleasant customs inspection by relying purely on luck and positive thinking. Brandon, she said on the 4th day, while the aliens were still trying to figure out how their harassment drones had been converted into home security systems. Remember that history course you took on ancient Earth military tactics? Brandon Torres, who was currently calibrating a sensor array built from salvaged drone components, paused in his work. The one about asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run operations, that sort of thing. That's the one. I'm thinking our mysterious benefactors might benefit from a practical demonstration. The aliens, monitoring this conversation through their surveillance equipment, made careful notes about human educational systems, apparently including military history, in their civilian curriculum. This seemed oddly comprehensive for a species they had classified as barely capable of organized agriculture. Amy's first target was what appeared to be an automated supply drop, designed to deliver additional harassment drones to continue the experiment. The drop pod landed approximately 12 kilometers from their base, well outside what the aliens considered the humans' operational range. Amy covered the distance in under 3 hours, moving through terrain that should have been impossible for creatures evolved for grassland environments. She disabled the supply pod's security systems, looted its contents, and left behind what could only be described as a calling card. A message burned into the pod's hull in perfectly legible alien script that roughly translated to "Thanks for the free stuff, idiots." How did she learn to write in our language? General Krafnog demanded. More importantly, Commander Molly added with growing alarm. How did she cover 12 kilometers of broken terrain in 3 hours while carrying 40 kilograms of stolen equipment? The answer, had they bothered to consult Amy's personnel files more thoroughly, was that humans who spent their lives maintaining aging cargo vessels in deep space tended to develop what their species euphemistically called practical skills. Skills that included basic xenolinguistics, field repairs under combat conditions, and the ability to carry unreasonable amounts of equipment across unreasonable distances while maintaining what they called operational tempo. Brandon's first night raid came 2 days later. The aliens had established a forward observation post, approximately 8 kilometers from the human base, equipped with advanced surveillance equipment, and defended by automated security systems. Brandon Torres infiltrated the position, disabled its defenses, downloaded its entire database, and was back at base before the aliens even realized they'd been robbed. He bypassed quantum encryption protocols, Quartermaster A reported, his voice carrying the particular strain that comes from having to explain the impossible to superiors who don't want to hear it. Protocols that are supposed to be theoretically unbreakable by any civilization below level 7 technological development. Impossible, Admiral Drahorn declared. Those systems were designed by our finest cryptographers. Nevertheless, sir, they appear to have been cracked using what our analysis suggests was a combination of mathematical intuition and what humans apparently call educated guessing. The raids continued. Every automated station, every supply drop, every piece of equipment the aliens deployed to monitor or harass their test subjects somehow ended up either destroyed, captured, or converted into components for the humans' steadily expanding base. Amy implemented what she called acquisition protocols, which seemed to involve treating every alien deployment as a delivery service that had simply forgotten to send a bill. Brandon developed reconnaissance procedures that turned alien surveillance equipment into early warning systems for human operations. Within 2 weeks, the humans had established what could only be described as a military operation. They had communications, intelligence gathering, supply acquisition, and a defensive perimeter that looked increasingly like something designed by people who had given serious thought to the theoretical problems of fighting technologically superior opponents. Sir, Quartermaster A reported during what had become increasingly tense daily briefings, we're experiencing significant equipment losses. Our resupply schedule is falling behind, and our monitoring capabilities have been compromised across multiple sectors by 2 primitive cargo haulers and their crew. Commander Molly's voice carried the incredulous tone of someone whose worldview was experiencing structural damage. Well, Quartermaster A replied with the diplomatic precision of someone delivering news that nobody wanted to hear. Technically, yes. Admiral Vashi arrived on the morning of the 16th day with the kind of ominous presence that suggested someone very important was very unhappy about something. His reputation preceded him like a small localized storm system, carrying whispers of previous experiments that had been terminated with extreme prejudice and research teams that had been reassigned to monitoring gas giant atmospheric patterns. Gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally overseen the subjugation of 43 star systems. I trust you can explain why a simple behavioral study of primitive bipeds has resulted in the loss of 67 automated units, 4 forward observation posts, and what our accounting department has calculated as approximately 2 million credits worth of military hardware. Admiral Drahorn's mandibles clicked nervously as he consulted his reports. Admiral Vashi, sir, the subjects have proven unexpectedly adaptive, but we have the situation well in hand. Do you? Vashi's tone suggested that he found this assessment roughly as credible as a promise of eternal youth from a discount medical facility. Show me. The monitoring screens flickered to life, displaying Amy Kowalski's base in all its impossible glory. What had started as a desperate survival shelter now resembled a small military installation, complete with defensive emplacements, communications arrays, manufacturing facilities, and what appeared to be a vehicle bay, housing several jury-rigged transport craft built from salvaged alien technology. Impressive, Admiral Vashi observed with the kind of professional appreciation that career military officers reserved for particularly elegant tactical solutions. And this was accomplished by how many subjects? 7. General Krafnog replied quietly. Amy Kowalski, Brandon Torres, and 5 crew members. 7 individuals, classified as primitive, with no advanced technology, no outside support, and no prior knowledge of our systems. Vashi's compound eyes focused on the screen where Amy was apparently conducting what looked suspiciously like military training exercises with her crew. Sir, if I may, Commander Molly interjected. Our analysis suggests they've been extremely fortunate in their random attempts to adapt our technology. Admiral Vashi turned his attention to a secondary monitor, where Brandon Torres was installing what their computer systems identified as a modified faster-than-light communications array. Random adaptation, he repeated. And I suppose they randomly learned to speak our language, randomly mastered quantum encryption protocols, and randomly developed tactical doctrine that would be impressive in a graduate-level military academy. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hum of monitoring equipment, and the distant sound of several careers ending. Sir, Quartermaster A reported with the resigned tone of someone delivering a death sentence. Long-range scans indicate they've established contact with other human settlements. They appear to be sharing technical specifications and tactical information across multiple star systems. Admiral Vashi's expression, insofar as his species could be said to have expressions, suggested the dawning realization that what they had mistaken for a simple scientific experiment had somehow evolved into something considerably more problematic. Gentlemen, he said quietly, I believe we may have made a rather significant error in judgment. The attack came at 0347 hours, station time, which the aliens would later learn was a tactical decision based on human research into their species' circadian rhythms. Amy Kowalski had apparently spent considerable time studying alien sleep cycles, guard rotations, and what humans cheerfully called optimal violence scheduling. Moran, the facility's chief security officer, was enjoying what passed for coffee among his species when every alarm in the research station began screaming simultaneously. His 8 legs carried him to the security center with the practiced efficiency of someone who had drilled for this scenario countless times, though never quite imagining it would involve primitive cargo haulers. Report, he barked at his subordinate, Morton, whose own collection of appendages was frantically working multiple control interfaces. Multiple perimeter breaches, sir. Automated defenses are, sir, they're not responding to command protocols. On the security monitors, Amy Kowalski and her team moved through the station's outer defenses, with the fluid precision of a military unit that had spent weeks studying every technical manual they had stolen. They weren't just attacking, they were systematically dismantling the station's defensive grid using the aliens' own protocols against them. How are they bypassing quantum-encrypted command channels? Moran demanded, watching in fascination as Brandon Torres somehow convinced a security turret to rotate 180 degrees and begin firing on its neighboring installations. Unknown, sir. They appear to have complete access to our security networks. What Moran didn't know, because alien intelligence services had apparently never encountered the human concept of documentation, was that Brandon had spent the past 2 weeks reading every technical manual, maintenance guide and user instruction booklet he had acquired during his raids. Humans, it turned out, actually read the instructions, a behavioral trait so unprecedented that alien security designers had never bothered to account for it. Amy's team moved through the station like they owned it, which from a practical standpoint, they now did. Every blast door opened at their approach, every security checkpoint waved them through, and every defensive system either shut down politely or began attacking its own allies. Sir, Morden reported with the kind of professional calm that comes from accepting that reality has officially stopped making sense. They've reached the primary research level. Deploy the emergency security teams, Moran ordered. What happened next violated every principle of military engagement that alien tactical doctrine had established over centuries of conquering primitive worlds. The emergency security teams, equipped with advanced weaponry and body armor that could stop anything short of a small nuclear device, encountered 7 humans carrying improvised weapons built from salvaged cargo equipment. The humans won, not through superior firepower, though their improvised weapons proved disturbingly effective, not through numerical advantage, since they were outnumbered approximately 4-1. They won through what military historians would later classify as aggressive applied creativity, which was apparently the human term for turning every piece of alien technology into something its designers had never intended. Amy Kowalski dispatched 3 security officers using a modified cargo loader that she had somehow converted into what could only be described as a mechanized combat suit. Brandon Torres neutralized an entire security checkpoint by convincing their own environmental systems to flood the area with harmless but incapacitating gas. The rest of her crew demonstrated that humans could apparently weaponize anything, including a food preparation unit that had been creatively repurposed into something that launched frozen meal packets at velocities approaching the speed of sound. "Sir," Morden reported, his voice carrying the shell-shocked tone of someone whose understanding of the universe had just been thoroughly revised, "they've captured the command center." "How?" Moran asked, though he suspected he really didn't want to know the answer. "They walked in through the front door, sir. Apparently, they've been monitoring our communications for weeks and knew exactly when the command staff would be at lunch." Through the security monitors, Moran watched Amy Kowalski settle into Admiral Drawhorn's personal command chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had just completed a particularly challenging home improvement project. She was examining the station's control systems with the focused attention of a professional who was about to make some significant modifications to someone else's property. "Attention research station personnel." Amy's voice echoed through the facility's communication system, her tone carrying the kind of professional courtesy that somehow made her words even more terrifying. "This facility is now under new management. Please proceed to designated assembly areas for processing." Moran's mandibles clicked involuntarily. "Processing? For immediate relocation to the surface," Amy continued cheerfully. "Don't worry, we've prepared accommodations. You'll find them quite educational." The revelation came when Brandon Torres finished downloading the research station's complete database, including files that were apparently classified so far above their security clearance that several alien intelligence agencies didn't know they existed. "Amy," Brandon called from the station's communications center, his voice carrying the particular strain that comes from discovering something so outrageous that anger hasn't quite caught up with comprehension. "You need to see this." Amy Kowalski reviewed the files with the methodical attention she usually reserved for cargo manifests and equipment maintenance schedules. Her expression progressed through confusion, disbelief, and finally settled into the kind of cold fury that made smart people reconsider their life choices. "We're an experiment," she said quietly, her voice carrying the dangerous calm of someone who had just discovered that their entire ordeal had been deliberately orchestrated for someone else's entertainment. "Controlled adversity testing," Brandon confirmed, reading from files that detailed not just their own situation, but hundreds of similar experiments conducted on human settlements across dozens of star systems. "They've been treating us like laboratory animals." The database contained everything: psychological profiles, behavioral predictions, betting pools among the research staff on how long various human test subjects would survive. There were detailed analyses of human failure modes, cost-benefit calculations on experiment parameters, and what appeared to be a peer review paper titled "Optimizing Primitive Species Stress Response Through Systematic Harassment Protocols." Amy's hands, which had remained steady through everything from emergency hull repairs to combat operations, began to tremble slightly as she absorbed the full scope of what had been done to her people. "Brandon," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made experienced spacers check their life insurance policies, "activate the long-range communications array." "Amy, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," she replied, her fingers already working the station's communication controls, "that it's time for these superior beings to meet some of their other test subjects." The next 6 hours witnessed what alien intelligence services would later classify as communication event designation. Oh no, Amy Kowalski, using the research station's own equipment, contacted every human settlement that appeared in the alien experimental database. The responses were immediate and uniform. Variations on the theme of "we've been wondering when someone would figure that out." It turned out that humans across 17 star systems had been experiencing similar mysterious accidents, random equipment failures, and coincidental hostile encounters. More importantly, they had been comparing notes, sharing technical solutions, and developing what could only be described as a comprehensive strategy for dealing with unwanted scientific attention. Admiral Vashi, General Krafnog reported with the professional resignation of someone delivering news that would probably result in his immediate reassignment to waste management duties. We have a problem, larger than the one we already have. Sir, our long-range monitoring stations are reporting coordinated human activity across multiple sectors. They appear to be organizing. Admiral Vashi's compound eyes focused on intelligence reports that painted a picture of systematic human operations spanning dozens of worlds. Supply raids, communication intercepts, technology acquisition, and what appeared to be the establishment of a command and control network that stretched across half the galaxy. Gentlemen, he said with the weary tone of someone whose career had just experienced a catastrophic malfunction, I believe our experiment has concluded. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to like the results. Admiral Drafhorn's desperate attempt to salvage the situation involved what military strategists would later classify as panic-driven decision-making with catastrophic implementation. His plan, such as it was, consisted of using the research station's self-destruct system to eliminate the evidence, and hoping that destroying one human settlement would somehow discourage the others. He activated the destruct sequence from his personal flagship, safely positioned 3 light minutes away from the station, and waited for the satisfying explosion that would end this embarrassing chapter in alien scientific achievement. The explosion never came. Instead, his communication system activated, displaying the image of Amy Kowalski sitting in what had been his personal command chair, looking remarkably comfortable for someone whose base of operations was supposedly about to become a small localized star. Admiral Drafhorn, she said with the kind of professional courtesy that somehow managed to be more intimidating than outright threats. We need to talk. Impossible. Drafhorn sputtered, his mandibles clicking frantically. I activated the self-destruct sequence. That station should be vapor by now. Amy's expression suggested the kind of patient amusement reserved for children who had just discovered that adults didn't actually know everything. Yes, we figured you might try something like that. Brandon's quite good with security system. He's also developed some interesting theories about alien psychology. Behind her, Brandon Torres waved cheerfully from a control station that was displaying what appeared to be complete access to the flagship's navigation, communications, and life support systems. How? Drafhorn asked, though he was beginning to suspect that the answer would involve more human adaptability than his sanity could comfortably process. Admiral, Amy said, leaning forward with the expression of someone about to deliver an educational experience, you spent weeks studying us, analyzing our behavior, treating us like specimens in your laboratory. You made one crucial mistake, which was, you never considered that we might be studying you right back. The screens around Admiral Drafhorn lit up with displays showing human operations across dozens of star systems. Former test subjects, who were now dismantling alien research facilities, capturing alien technology, and establishing what appeared to be a comprehensive intelligence network focused entirely on their former tormentors. Congratulations, Admiral. Amy continued, her smile carrying the particular warmth of someone who had just won a game that the other player hadn't realized they were playing. You're now the test subjects, and we've learned so much about your species' stress responses under controlled adversity. Admiral Drafhorn's last coherent thought, before his flagship's life support systems began playing what humans apparently considered educational music, was that perhaps the High Council's classification of humans as primitive might have been slightly optimistic. The experiment, it turned out, was far from over. It had simply changed management.